The money psychology that controls the masses. Money is rarely about numbers alone. Most people imagine their financial decisions are purely logical, comparing prices, saving for goals, investing wisely. That is comforting. It feels rational, like a personal accomplishment. But the truth is far less tidy. Money controls behavior not because of its quantity, but because of the beliefs and emotions tied to it. These beliefs form before anyone ever earns a paycheck, often in subtle, almost invisible ways. Stories from childhood, habits observed at home, cultural signals about status and value, they all combine to shape how people react to money for decades. And those reactions are rarely conscious. People may feel they are making independent decisions, but in reality, millions share the same patterns, often without questioning why. Understanding this psychology is not about blaming anyone. It is about uncovering the invisible forces that quietly shape choice, risk tolerance, ambition, and even happiness. Money as safety, not strategy. For most people, money is safety first. It is not about growth, freedom, or strategy. It is about preventing disaster. That instinct is powerful and understandable. From the earliest experiences, being told to save allowance, watching parents worry about bills, hearing stories of sudden misfortune, money is framed as a shield, not a tool. Safety is immediate, tangible, and emotionally reassuring. Strategy, in contrast, is abstract, long-term, and uncertain. That imbalance affects how people behave daily. People hold on to money tightly, avoid risk, and choose security over opportunity, even when strategic choices could lead to significant growth. This mindset quietly shapes decisions that feel personal but are culturally shared. People hesitate to invest, delay career moves, and prioritize emergency savings while neglecting opportunity. The focus is on avoiding loss rather than creating gain. That instinct may have protective value in the short term, but over time, it subtly limits mobility. Safety becomes a default, and strategy is deferred indefinitely. Most people do not realize that their reluctance to take calculated risks is not a personal flaw. It is the result of decades of conditioning that frames money as protection first. Money as safety also creates invisible stress. It demands constant attention, monitoring every transaction, worrying about unforeseen costs, and creating a sense that peace of mind is contingent on never making a mistake. People experience exhaustion while still feeling insufficiently secure. They are trapped in a loop of vigilance, trading potential opportunity for a sense of control that never feels complete. Recognizing money as safety allows a shift. Once people see it as a tool rather than only a shield, they can begin experimenting, allocating resources strategically, and balancing preservation with growth. The fear of losing is stronger than the desire to gain. Psychology research consistently shows that losses hurt more than gains satisfy. Humans feel the sting of losing money more intensely than the joy of earning the same amount. This principle shapes everyday financial behavior more than most people realize. People hesitate to invest in stocks, start a business, or negotiate for raises because the possibility of loss looms larger than the potential for gain. That fear is rational at a primal level. It is rooted in survival instincts. But in modern economies, it can be paralyzing. When fear dominates, opportunity shrinks. People stick with jobs they dislike because leaving feels riskier than staying. They avoid investments that could compound wealth because short-term volatility feels threatening. They hoard savings rather than deploying capital to grow. The result is a paradox. People work tirelessly, save consistently, and make safe choices, yet they rarely break free from financial stagnation. This imbalance is cultural as much as psychological. Millions share the same instincts and millions reinforce the same narrative. Loss is dangerous, gain is uncertain, and security must come first. The fear of losing also influences perception of success. People undervalue achievements that carry risk and overvalue possessions that feel secure. Choices become reactive rather than proactive. Decisions are made to avoid regret rather than pursue opportunity. Understanding this tendency is crucial. It allows people to differentiate between fear that is protective and fear that is restrictive, creating space to act intentionally rather than reactively. Once people recognize that loss aversion drives so much behavior, it becomes possible to make deliberate choices that balance risk and reward, instead of letting fear dictate every step. Scarcity thinking that shrinks possibility. Scarcity thinking is a lens through which the world appears smaller than it is. When resources feel limited, people focus obsessively on what they lack, rather than what they could create. Money scarcity is particularly insidious because it infiltrates every decision, shaping priorities, timelines, and aspirations. People delay major life moves, avoid investment, and cling to small amounts of cash because their attention is constantly drawn to what they do not have. Scarcity is reinforced socially and culturally. Seeing peers struggle, comparing to friends or family, and observing economic news creates a subtle but persistent narrative that resources are scarce and must be protected. That perception shrinks possibility. People stop exploring, stop experimenting, and stop asking, "What if?" because the world feels constrained. The paradox is that scarcity is often a perception rather than a literal condition. Even small adjustments in mindset or understanding can dramatically expand perceived options, yet many remain locked in scarcity thinking without realizing it. This mindset also creates stress that is invisible but exhausting. People focus relentlessly on deficits instead of opportunities, cultivating anxiety about what could go wrong while overlooking what could go right. Every choice is weighed against the risk of loss rather than the potential for gain. Scarcity thinking conditions people to see limits where flexibility or abundance may exist. Awareness of this dynamic is the first step toward reclaiming agency. Once people recognize scarcity as a psychological effect, they can deliberately seek growth, take calculated risks, and begin thinking in terms of possibilities rather than restrictions. The illusion of hard work as a guarantee. For generations, the narrative has been simple: work hard, be disciplined, and financial stability will follow. That idea is powerful, comforting, and pervasive. It appeals to the sense of justice in life. If you try, you should succeed. But in reality, hard work is no longer a reliable guarantee. Economic structures, social conditions, and systemic inequalities mean that effort does not always translate into reward. The illusion persists because people cling to it. Abandoning it would force them to confront uncertainty, randomness, and structural challenges that are uncomfortable to acknowledge. This belief shapes behavior in subtle ways. People overwork, save obsessively, and avoid experimentation because they trust that diligence will carry them forward. When results fail to match effort, frustration and self-blame emerge. The mismatch creates confusion. Why did I try so hard and still struggle? The truth is not failure. It is that effort is necessary but not sufficient. Results depend on timing, context, opportunity, and resources, not effort alone. Recognizing this distinction shifts perspective from personal inadequacy to strategic thinking. People can preserve hard work as a foundation while seeking leverage, opportunity, and informed decisions that amplify outcomes. The illusion of hard work as a guarantee also fuels financial inertia. People stick to the familiar because it feels like proven effort will pay off eventually. They hesitate to innovate, change careers, or explore alternative strategies. Debt normalized as lifestyle. Debt has become so commonplace that most people barely notice it anymore. It is no longer a signal of risk or failure. It is simply a part of daily life. Student loans, car payments, credit cards, and even rent-to-own schemes have become normalized structures people move through without questioning. The fact that millions carry persistent debt is no longer shocking. It is assumed, expected, and in many cases, encouraged by culture and institutions. This normalization has a profound effect on behavior because it shapes expectations. People budget, spend, and make life choices as if debt is a standard fixture, not a consequence. It quietly compresses freedom, forcing priorities around repayment schedules, interest rates, and financial obligations, while masking the long-term opportunity cost of borrowed capital. The psychological impact of normalized debt is subtle but relentless. Carrying debt shapes risk perception, limits ambition, and creates an unconscious tolerance for financial stress. People assume that being behind or in the red is the natural state of adulthood, so choices become reactive rather than strategic. Long-term investments, entrepreneurial endeavors, or career shifts feel inaccessible because debt repayment dominates attention. Even as people work harder to meet obligations, the structure of debt ensures that progress often feels slow or invisible, creating a cycle where effort is measured in survival rather than growth. Debt also changes social behavior. Cultural messaging celebrates consumption financed by credit as a sign of success. Owning the latest phone, car, or brand becomes aspirational, even as the underlying debt quietly expands. People internalize this tension between appearance and reality. They want status markers, but the cost is increasingly structural. Consumption as identity. In modern society, consumption is no longer just about satisfying needs. It has become a central axis of identity. The products people buy, the brands they display, and the experiences they share communicate who they are in subtle and powerful ways. Clothing, electronics, cars, and even subscription services carry signals of social status, taste, and belonging. This association between consumption and identity creates pressure to purchase beyond practical necessity, often financed through credit or deferred earnings. Spending ceases to be a neutral action and becomes an act of self-definition. This psychological tie between self-worth and spending shapes long-term behavior in profound ways. People make decisions that feel personal and autonomous, yet they are heavily influenced by collective norms and expectations. Aspirations are filtered through what others value, rather than what individuals truly need or desire. That dynamic can create invisible stress. People pursue products, experiences, and lifestyles to maintain identity and belonging, even when these choices undermine long-term financial stability. Consumption is no longer a tool for satisfaction. It is a lens through which society evaluates competence, taste, and success. The consequences are cumulative. Over time, identity-driven consumption compounds debt, shrinks savings, and shifts attention from strategic planning to immediate appearance. People internalize external judgments as personal truths, mistaking social reinforcement for personal preference. This creates an invisible feedback loop where self-perception is inseparable from spending patterns, and financial decisions are dictated less by rational assessment than by perceived social alignment. Awareness of this dynamic allows people to separate personal identity from consumption patterns, making deliberate choices rather than reflexive ones. Time preference that favors now over later. Humans are wired to favor immediate gratification over delayed reward, a phenomenon economists call time preference. That preference is amplified in modern financial contexts, where instant access to goods, services, and digital experiences reinforces the pull of the present. People increasingly prioritize short-term satisfaction, whether through discretionary spending, impulsive purchases, or choosing convenience over investment. This behavioral pattern has long-term consequences because prioritizing now erodes the capacity to plan, save, and leverage resources for future stability and growth. Time preference also interacts with scarcity and debt in ways that compound its impact. When immediate pressures loom, bills, rent, loan payments, short-term choices dominate cognition. Opportunities for delayed reward, such as investing in education, retirement accounts, or entrepreneurial ventures feel abstract, distant, and less urgent. People rationalize present-focused behavior as practical or inevitable, unaware that cultural, economic, and psychological forces have aligned to make the present disproportionately compelling. This imbalance shifts priorities toward consumption, comfort, and instant satisfaction at the expense of long-term resilience. The consequences are more than financial. They shape identity, lifestyle, and decision-making. People develop habits that reward the present moment, reinforcing patterns of impulsivity and reactive behavior. Long-term goals feel abstract or uncertain, leading to delayed planning, insufficient preparation, and reliance on emergency measures when challenges arise. Understanding time preference illuminates why people act in ways that feel irrational, yet are predictable when examined through the lens of psychology. Once recognized, it is possible to design interventions, habits, automated systems, or frameworks that shift attention from short-term impulses to long-term outcomes without requiring constant vigilance or willpower. Authority bias in financial advice. People rarely question the advice they receive from perceived authorities. From financial planners to gurus on social media, the credibility of a source often overshadows the substance of the advice itself. Authority bias is subtle because it feels rational. They know more than I do, so I should listen. Yet history and research show that following advice without critical thinking often reproduces systemic patterns rather than individualized success. People adopt strategies, invest in products, or make career moves not because they suit personal circumstances, but because someone with credentials or a platform told them to. This unconscious deference amplifies the influence of culture and institutions, steering financial behavior in ways that are predictable and widespread. Authority bias also discourages questioning. Even when advice conflicts with personal experience or goals, people hesitate to challenge it for fear of appearing ignorant. This dynamic creates a feedback loop where conventional wisdom is reinforced, often perpetuating outdated strategies that no longer work in modern economic realities. People internalize instructions as immutable truths, which limits experimentation, creativity, and personal agency. Recognizing the role of authority bias is crucial because it allows individuals to filter guidance through personal context, distinguishing insight from generalized instruction, and applying wisdom selectively rather than blindly. Furthermore, the psychological impact extends beyond individual decisions. Authority bias shapes trust, risk tolerance, and emotional reactions to financial events. People feel relief or validation when following expert advice, but also heightened anxiety when outcomes do not align, even if the decisions were rational. Awareness of this bias allows people to reclaim agency, approach guidance critically, and make choices aligned with long-term objectives rather than social approval or perceived authority. Comparison as a financial trap. Humans naturally compare themselves to others, but when it comes to money, comparison often functions as a trap rather than a guide. Social media amplifies this tendency, creating constant visibility into the lifestyles, achievements, and possessions of peers, neighbors, and influencers. People assess their progress, spending, and status not against their own goals or context, but against curated snapshots designed for attention, often inflating the sense of scarcity or inadequacy. The result is a perpetual state of financial anxiety masked as aspiration. Comparison encourages consumption, overwork, and deferred planning. People purchase items or pursue experiences, not for need or value, but to signal equivalence or superiority in a social hierarchy. This behavior reinforces the psychological mechanisms that keep individuals tied to debt, immediate gratification, and anxiety. Even subtle differences, someone driving a newer car or living in a trendier neighborhood, become reference points that subtly shift perception of success and adequacy. Recognition of this dynamic allows people to disengage from social scripts, measure progress internally, and create benchmarks grounded in personal circumstances rather than external comparisons. The trap of comparison also impacts decision-making at scale. Career choices, investments, and risk tolerance are influenced by what others are doing rather than what makes sense for one's own goals. People chase trends rather than fundamentals, assuming that emulation equals progress. Awareness of this bias creates freedom. Once it is recognized, decisions can be evaluated based on personal metrics rather than perceived social pressure, creating clarity, control, and a more intentional relationship with money. Delayed gratification framed as punishment. The concept of delayed gratification is often framed as moral virtue, yet culturally, it is frequently misrepresented as a form of punishment. People are told to wait, sacrifice, or earn slowly, implying that pleasure or comfort must be deferred indefinitely. While delayed gratification can build discipline, when framed as punishment, it fosters resentment, internal conflict, and emotional resistance. Money becomes associated with suffering rather than opportunity, and the lessons intended to cultivate patience can instead create fear and anxiety around spending, investment, and risk. This misframing also limits strategic thinking. People equate waiting with compliance rather than planning, mistaking delay for progress. They defer experiences, investments, or lifestyle changes while believing that patience alone ensures reward. When outcomes fail to match effort, frustration and guilt accumulate, reinforcing the notion that personal inadequacy caused the mismatch. Understanding the difference between deliberate delayed gratification and culturally imposed punishment allows people to approach money strategically, balancing present needs with long-term objectives without internalizing deprivation as virtue. Moreover, framing delay as punishment distorts value perception. People overemphasize delayed outcomes while underestimating the benefits of immediate, low-risk gains. They fail to leverage incremental opportunities, thinking that only deferred rewards matter. Awareness of this psychological trap transforms delay from emotional burden to tactical advantage, allowing deliberate, empowered decision-making instead of reactive compliance. Financial language that confuses instead of empowers. Financial language is dense, technical, and often designed more to obscure than illuminate. Terms like equity, amortization, derivatives, or even compound interest are presented as barriers, reinforcing the idea that money is a complex domain reserved for experts. This creates a subtle psychological barrier. People feel intimidated, incapable, and dependent on advisors or systems they do not fully understand. Language that confuses empowers institutions and narratives rather than individuals, controlling behavior through opacity rather than coercion. The effect is cumulative. People avoid investment, delay planning, and fail to negotiate or strategize because the terminology itself signals complexity and risk. Even basic financial decisions are deferred until external guidance is sought, reinforcing reliance on authority and perpetuating patterns of inaction. Awareness of how language shapes behavior allows individuals to reclaim autonomy. Understanding concepts on one's own terms transforms financial literacy from intimidation into actionable insight, creating freedom to act intentionally rather than reactively. Furthermore, confusing language limits imagination. People are unable to visualize options, create alternatives, or innovate with money because the vocabulary itself constrains thinking. Once language is decoded and internalized, financial decision-making becomes accessible, empowering, and proactive, rather than restrictive or overwhelming. Clarity in words translates directly into clarity in action. Why awareness breaks control? Ultimately, all these psychological levers, authority bias, comparison, scarcity thinking, debt normalization, consumption identity, language, silence, hope, operate invisibly to guide behavior. Awareness is the single most powerful tool for breaking this control. Once the mechanisms are understood, people can step outside automatic responses, question inherited narratives, and make deliberate choices. Knowledge transforms invisible influence into conscious agency. Awareness allows for strategic alignment. Understanding why fear dominates, why debt feels inevitable, and why social comparison distorts perception enables people to reclaim autonomy over resources, goals, and identity. It empowers action over reaction, intentionality over inertia, and clarity over confusion. The moment these dynamics are visible, the patterns lose their unconscious power. Decisions that once felt predetermined can be reframed, evaluated, and executed with foresight. Breaking control through awareness is not about eliminating challenge. It is about transforming relationship with money from reactive compliance to informed, deliberate engagement. The invisible systems of influence no longer dictate outcomes when insight is applied. People can act, plan, and grow with clarity, agency, and foresight, creating freedom in a world that quietly shapes behavior on a massive scale. This is not about blame, it is about clarity. If this video helped you see your own habits differently, hit like so others find it too. Subscribe if you want grounded conversations about money, psychology, and real-life thinking without noise. Share this with someone who feels stuck but cannot explain why. And leave a comment with your thoughts because understanding money starts with understanding ourselves.